66 million years ago, Earth had no idea it was about to get hit by the deadliest plot twist in natural history. The sky looked calm. The oceans were quiet. Dinosaurs ruled everything. And then, out of nowhere, death arrived at 20 kilometers per second. A 6-mile-wide asteroid, bigger than Mount Everest and moving faster than anything humanity has ever built, came screaming into Earth's atmosphere. It wasn't just a rock, it was a planet killer, and it hit with the force of more than 10 billion nuclear bombs. The moment it slammed into what is now the Yucatan Peninsula, everything changed. The ground liquefied. A crater 150 kilometers wide exploded open in a fraction of a second. The shockwave shredded forests thousands of kilometers away. Mountains vaporized. The ocean didn't just splash out, it turned into a wall of fire. Within minutes, molten debris shot into space, then rained back down across the entire planet, heating the atmosphere to the temperature of a pizza oven. Wildfires didn't just start, they ignited everywhere at once. Then came the global blackout. Thick clouds of dust and sulfur wrapped around Earth, blocking sunlight for months. Plants died, food chains collapsed, temperatures plummeted, and the dinosaurs, once unstoppable, suddenly had nothing left to eat, nowhere to hide, and no way to survive the endless night. But the craziest part? That single impact didn't just destroy, it cleared the stage. It opened the door for the tiny, shivering mammals that somehow made it through. And from those survivors came primates. From primates came humans. And from humans, well, here we are, retelling the moment the universe hit reset on planet Earth. The Chicxulub impact wasn't just a disaster. It was the most violent turning point in the history of life. A reminder that sometimes the biggest changes come from the loudest collisions.
74,000 years ago, humanity came terrifyingly close to hitting the permanent game over screen. And the cause wasn't an asteroid, a virus, or a prehistoric war. It was a volcano. But not just any volcano, a monster named Toba. Lake Toba in Indonesia looks peaceful today, but beneath that calm blue water sits the scar of one of the most violent volcanic eruptions in Earth's history. When Toba blew, it wasn't a normal eruption. It was a planetary-level detonation, a geological nuke so massive it makes every eruption in recorded history look like a birthday sparkler. The explosion launched more than 2,800 cubic kilometers of ash and rock into the sky. The sound alone would have shattered eardrums from continents away. Entire mountains were vaporized. Forests disappeared in seconds. The blast carved out a crater almost 100 kilometers long, swallowing the landscape whole. But the real nightmare began after the explosion. Ash didn't just cover Indonesia. It smothered Asia, India, the Middle East, and even parts of Africa. Sunlight dimmed, temperatures crashed. Earth suddenly plunged into a volcanic winter that lasted years. A chill so brutal it wiped out food sources, collapsed ecosystems, and turned survival into a desperate lottery. And this is where things get absolutely insane. According to genetic studies, humanity's population may have plummeted to just a few thousand survivors. Imagine that! The entire human species squeezed down to the size of a small town. One bad winter, one unlucky storm, and we wouldn't be here today. No civilizations, no history, no you, no me. And yet somehow a handful of humans clung to life. They endured the cold, the darkness, and the starvation. They held on through an extinction-level event triggered by Earth itself. From that tiny group of survivors came every human alive today. All 7+ billion of us trace our existence back through a line of unbelievably resilient ancestors who outlived a supervolcano that nearly erased our species. The Toba eruption wasn't just catastrophic, it was the closest humanity has ever come to disappearing without a trace. In the middle of the 14th century, Europe was living its normal, chaotic medieval life. Kings fighting kings, peasants trying to stay alive, and cities packed tight with people who barely understood how disease worked. Then, something unimaginable arrived. Not an army, not a famine, something much quieter, much deadlier: the Black Death. It began far away in the depths of Central Asia, where a tiny bacterium named Yersinia pestis hitchhiked inside fleas living on rats. That microscopic killer had no idea it was about to rewrite human history. As trade routes connected east and west, the disease traveled with merchants, caravans, and ships. By the time Europe realized what was happening, it was already too late. The plague didn't knock politely, it smashed the door open. One moment, a town was bustling with life. A week later, half the population was gone. Victims developed swollen, agonizing buboes, fevers so intense they caused delirium, blackened skin. The smell of death followed the disease like a shadow. Cities turned into ghost towns. Entire families died in a single night. Priests refused last rites. Doctors wore bird-like masks stuffed with herbs, having no clue that the real danger was the flea bites and airborne particles swirling through the streets. Panic spread faster than the plague itself. And the numbers were straight up apocalyptic. In just a few brutal years, the Black Death killed around 50 million people in Europe alone. Some regions lost 70 to 90% of their population. Villages vanished forever. Fields went unharvested. Ships drifted into harbors with entire crews dead aboard. But here's the part people forget. After the unimaginable loss came massive change. With fewer workers, peasants gained power. Labor became valuable. The old feudal world cracked. Medicine advanced. Society reshaped itself, forced into evolution by one of the deadliest events in human history. The Black Death wasn't just a pandemic, it was a turning point. A dark, brutal reminder that something too small to see can shatter a continent and force civilization to rebuild from the ashes.
If you could time travel to any year in human history, 536 AD is the one year you absolutely should avoid. Historians call it the worst year to be alive, and that's not an exaggeration. It was the moment the entire world felt cursed, confused, and plunged into a darkness nobody could explain. It started with a mystery. One day, the sun rose, but it didn't shine. People across Europe, the Middle East, and Asia looked up and saw a dim, ghostly disk hanging in the sky, glowing like a dying candle behind dirty glass. Days stayed cold, nights were freezing, and no one knew why. What we know now would have terrified them even more. Somewhere on Earth, a massive volcanic eruption blasted an enormous cloud of ash and sulfur into the atmosphere. The particles spread around the globe, wrapping the planet in a thick, sun-blocking veil. For 18 straight months, sunlight barely reached the ground. Imagine noon that looks like twilight. Imagine summers that feel like winter. That was 536. Crops failed everywhere. Harvests collapsed. People starved. Trade routes shut down as entire regions slid into chaos. Empires weakened, kingdoms fell apart. It was like the planet had hit pause on life itself. Tree rings from that era reveal something crazy. Temperatures dropped more than in some ice ages. And as if one eruption wasn't enough, two more eruptions followed in 540 and 547, slamming the world into a decade-long climate catastrophe. The fallout was brutal. Famine spread, societies fractured, and then, right when Earth was still choking under volcanic haze, another horror arrived, the Plague of Justinian, a pandemic that killed tens of millions. It was disaster stacked on top of disaster. But the most haunting part of 536 is how universal the suffering was. From Ireland to China, every chronicler, every historian wrote the same thing. The sun gave no light, the world grew cold, and people were afraid. The year 536 wasn't just dark. It was a global reset button, a reminder that when Earth decides to shift the rules, humanity has no choice but to endure the storm.
April 26, 1986, just after 1 in the morning. Most people in the Soviet Union are asleep. But inside Reactor 4 at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant, a chain of small mistakes is lining up into one of the worst technological disasters in human history. It began as a late-night safety test. Engineers were supposed to check whether the reactor could keep running during a power loss. But the reactor's design had a hidden flaw. The operators were exhausted, and the system they were testing was already unstable. When they tried to shut the reactor down, it didn't calm, it exploded. The blast launched a 1,000-ton reactor lid into the air, like a manhole cover kicked by a god. Fire tore through the building. Superheated graphite and radioactive fuel flew out in glowing chunks, falling across the roof like burning meteorites. Most terrifying of all, the reactor core was now exposed to the world, burning with a radioactive fury no human sense could detect. Firefighters arrived first, brave, unprotected, and unaware. They ran into the glowing wreckage without radiation suits, thinking it was just a normal electrical fire. Many of them would die within weeks, not even realizing what they had touched. The radiation spreading from the meltdown was monstrous. Invisible poison drifted over Ukraine, Belarus, and beyond. Entire towns woke up to a sunrise filled with deadly particles they couldn't see or smell. Birds dropped dead. Trees turned red. The air itself became a weapon. The Soviet government tried to hide the disaster, but when radiation detectors in Sweden went off 2 days later, the world realized something catastrophic had happened. Over the next 36 hours, more than 100,000 people were evacuated. Buses rolled through towns as families grabbed what they could. They thought they'd be gone for a few days. They never returned. Chernobyl's aftermath stretched through generations. Thyroid cancers, abandoned villages, the haunting exclusion zone where nature reclaimed everything humans left behind. Even today, the reactor is entombed under massive steel shields, still deadly, still unstable. Yet in the middle of the chaos, thousands of scientists, soldiers, miners, and engineers risked their lives to contain the catastrophe. Without them, half of Europe might have become uninhabitable. Chernobyl wasn't just a disaster. It was a warning carved into history with fire and radiation, showing how a single moment of human error can unleash devastation on a scale no one is ready for.
December 26, 2004 started like any other quiet holiday morning. Tourists were waking up in beachfront hotels. Fishermen were preparing their boats. Families walked along the shorelines of Thailand, Indonesia, Sri Lanka, India, and beyond. No one knew that deep beneath the Indian Ocean, the planet was about to tear itself open. At 7:58 a.m., a fault line along the Sunda Trench snapped with unimaginable violence. Two massive slabs of Earth's crust shifted, releasing energy equal to more than 20,000 Hiroshima bombs. The seafloor lurched upward by as much as 20 meters, instantly displacing billions of tons of water. The earthquake measured 9.1, one of the most powerful ever recorded. But the real terror was the wave it created. Far out at sea, the tsunami started as a barely noticeable swell, racing across the ocean at the speed of a jet. Close to shore, it began rising, growing, transforming into a moving wall of destruction. In places like Aceh, the ocean suddenly pulled back, exposing reefs and fish flopping on bare sand. Curious crowds walked out toward the retreating water. Minutes later, the first wave arrived. Not like a surf break, more like a black, roaring flood, taller than buildings, smashing everything in its path. Entire neighborhoods vanished under churning water and debris. Cars, houses, trees, boats, and people were swept away in seconds. The sound was like a constant roar, a violent growl of water and collapsing structures. Thailand's beaches were devastated. Sri Lankan trains were ripped from their tracks. Indian villages disappeared. The wave even circled the entire globe multiple times, echoing through the oceans like a pulse of pure destruction. When the water finally receded, the scale of the catastrophe was beyond comprehension. More than 230,000 people lost their lives. Millions were displaced. Entire coastlines were rewritten by nature in a single morning. Yet, in the middle of the devastation, stories of survival emerged. People clinging to rooftops, children carried by currents only to be found miles away, strangers risking everything to save others. Humanity shone through the darkest waves. The 2004 Indian Ocean Mega-Tsunami wasn't just a natural disaster. It was a brutal reminder of Earth's raw power. A single shift beneath the ocean floor that changed the world forever.
In the final year of World War I, the world thought it had already seen the worst humanity and nature could offer. Millions dead in the trenches, cities shattered, nations exhausted. But just as the war was ending, something far deadlier slipped into the world. A killer so small it was invisible, but so powerful it became the most lethal pandemic in human history. It started quietly, almost harmlessly. A few soldiers at a military camp in Kansas came down with strange fevers. Nothing unusual, nothing alarming. But within days, the number of sick exploded. This wasn't a normal flu. This virus moved like lightning, and it didn't play by the rules. Soldiers carried it across the Atlantic. Trenches turned into sickbeds. Barracks became morgues. And then it spread to civilians, to ships, to trains, to every corner of the world. By the time countries realized what was happening, the virus was everywhere. The symptoms were brutal. People didn't just cough, they drowned in their own lungs. Their faces turned blue from lack of oxygen. Some collapsed in the morning and were gone by nightfall. Entire families vanished within days. The most terrifying part? The virus didn't target the old or the weak. It hit healthy young adults the hardest, the very people the world relied on to rebuild after the war. Hospitals overflowed. Doctors died alongside their patients. Coffins ran out. Bodies were buried in mass graves. Cities enforced mask mandates, shut down schools, canceled gatherings. Streets fell silent. Still, the virus tore through humanity like wildfire. In just over a year, the Spanish flu of 1918 infected a third of the planet. It killed at least 50 million people. Some historians believe the number may be closer to 100 million, more than twice the deaths of World War I, more than any pandemic before or after. And yet, the world survived. Ordinary people became heroes, caring for the sick when no one else would. Nurses worked until they collapsed. Communities bonded through isolation and fear. Science learned hard lessons that would shape modern medicine forever. When it finally faded, the survivors emerged into a world forever changed. The war ended. Life returned, but the memory of the invisible enemy that nearly broke civilization stayed etched into history. The Spanish flu of 1918 wasn't just a pandemic. It was a global nightmare that arrived when humanity was already exhausted and still managed to shake the world to its core.
In the summer of 79 AD, life in the Roman city of Pompeii was almost too perfect. Warm streets, colorful markets, villas decorated with art, people laughing, drinking, living. And right next to them stood Mount Vesuvius, a mountain they believed was just a mountain. They had no idea it was one of the deadliest volcanoes in Europe, quietly filling with pressure. They had no idea they were living beside a ticking bomb. Then came the morning of August 24. It started with a sound like thunder. The ground trembled, birds scattered, and before anyone could react, the top of Vesuvius blew open with a force so violent it launched a column of ash and rock more than 20 kilometers into the sky. It looked like a black mushroom cloud rising over a peaceful city that had no defenses. Ash began falling like snow, light at first, annoying, then thicker, hotter. The sky darkened until noon looked like midnight. Streets clogged as people tried to flee, covering their mouths with cloth, panicking as the air turned into poison. And then the real horror hit. Pyroclastic surges, superheated clouds of gas, ash, and rock moving at highway speeds and hotter than any furnace. They rolled down the mountain like tidal waves of fire. In seconds, they erased everything. Homes collapsed. Bodies were buried instantly. Entire neighborhoods vanished in a single breath. The heat was so intense that it didn't just kill, it froze people in place, capturing their final moments in haunting detail. Pompeii, Herculaneum, Stabiae, entire cities silenced. When the eruption finally stopped after nearly 24 hours, the region was buried under meters of ash and rock. Pompeii disappeared from the map for almost 1,700 years. And then, in the 1700s, excavators started digging. What they found was chilling: a city frozen in time, tables still set, paintings still bright, people preserved in ash, their last expressions, their last moments, perfectly captured like a tragic time capsule. Mount Vesuvius didn't just destroy Pompeii, it immortalized it. A reminder carved into history that nature can erase a civilization in a single day, but also preserve it forever in the strangest, most haunting way imaginable.
August 6, 1945. A quiet summer morning in the Japanese city of Hiroshima. People were heading to work. Children were walking to school. The sky was clear, almost unnaturally peaceful. No one knew that a single plane flying high above them carried a weapon unlike anything the world had ever seen. At 8:15 a.m., the bomb dropped. Its name was Little Boy. Inside it, a chain reaction was waiting. A reaction capable of tearing apart atoms and releasing the kind of energy that normally lives inside stars. It detonated 600 meters above the city. In a fraction of a second, a blinding white flash swallowed everything. The temperature at the center of the explosion soared higher than the surface of the sun. Buildings turned to dust. Shadows of people were burned into sidewalks. A shockwave ripped through the city with the force of a hurricane made of fire. Within moments, Hiroshima was unrecognizable. Entire neighborhoods flattened, streets filled with debris. Survivors staggered through the ruins, burned, dazed, covered in radioactive ash. Some searched for loved ones. Others simply wandered, unable to understand what had happened. The blast killed tens of thousands instantly.
Tens of thousands more died from burns, injuries, and radiation in the following days and weeks. Hospitals overflowed, water turned contaminated, fires raged everywhere, and above the city, a massive mushroom cloud climbed into the sky, signaling the arrival of the atomic age. The world had entered a new reality, one where a single bomb could destroy a city in moments, one where humanity now possessed the power to end civilization with its own hands. Yet even in the middle of the devastation, people helped each other. Soldiers, nurses, strangers, and survivors worked to save the injured and comfort the dying. Courage appeared in the darkest hour when everything else had been taken away. The bombing of Hiroshima was not just a military act. It was a turning point for all of humanity, a moment when the world saw what nuclear fire could do and realized the stakes of its own inventions. The ruins of Hiroshima became a symbol, not just of destruction, but of memory, responsibility, and a warning the world can never afford to forget.
On August 9, 1945, just 3 days after Hiroshima, the world witnessed a second flash that would change history forever. At 11:02 a.m., the United States dropped a plutonium bomb nicknamed Fat Man over the city of Nagasaki. In a split second, an explosion brighter than the sun tore through the sky, unleashing unimaginable force. Entire districts vanished, steel beams twisted like paper, and a massive mushroom cloud rose thousands of feet high, visible from miles. Around 70,000 people lost their lives in the initial blast and its aftermath, and the city was left in ruins. The bombing of Nagasaki accelerated Japan's surrender and marked the end of World War II, but it also became a chilling symbol of nuclear power's destructive potential. Nagasaki's story stands as a somber warning of the cost of war and the devastating impact of humanity's deadliest invention.
On the morning of November 1st, 1755, Lisbon, a bustling European capital, was ripped apart by a massive earthquake estimated at magnitude 8.5 to 9.0. Buildings crumbled like sandcastles, churches collapsed during All Saints' Day services, and fires erupted across the city. But the devastation didn't stop there. Hours later, a towering tsunami surged through the streets and along the Tagus River, sweeping away survivors and debris alike. Thousands perished instantly, and it's estimated that up to 100,000 lives were lost. This catastrophe shocked the world, challenging the era's understanding of nature, religion, and human resilience. The combination of quake, fire, and flood made Lisbon a symbol of total destruction and the fragility of civilization.
On June 30, 1908, a remote region of Siberia witnessed a cataclysm unlike anything the modern world had ever seen. A massive object, likely an asteroid or comet fragment, exploded in the sky above the Tunguska River. The blast was equivalent to 10 to 15 megatons of TNT, hundreds of times more powerful than the Hiroshima bomb. Trees were flattened across 2,000 square kilometers, forming a radial pattern pointing to the epicenter, and eyewitnesses described a fireball brighter than the sun, followed by a thunderous shockwave that knocked people off their feet hundreds of kilometers away. Remarkably, no confirmed crater was ever found, making the event a haunting mystery. The Tunguska Explosion remains one of Earth's most powerful and enigmatic cosmic disasters, a reminder of how fragile life is in the face of celestial forces.
In the heart of America during the 1930s, a perfect storm of human mismanagement and nature's fury created one of history's most devastating environmental disasters, the Dust Bowl. Vast stretches of farmland across Oklahoma, Texas, Kansas, and surrounding states turned to barren wastelands as relentless drought and brutal winds swept away topsoil. Gigantic dust storms, sometimes called black blizzards, blotted out the sun, invaded homes, and forced families to flee in search of survival. Crops failed, livestock perished, and entire communities were uprooted. The Dust Bowl was more than an ecological catastrophe. It became a human tragedy of epic proportions, inspiring mass migration westward and forever shaping American culture, policy, and resilience in the face of environmental collapse.
On January 12, 2010, Haiti, the poorest nation in the Western Hemisphere, was struck by a catastrophic 7.0 magnitude earthquake near its densely populated capital, Port-au-Prince. Buildings crumbled like sandcastles, trapping hundreds of thousands beneath concrete and steel. Hospitals, schools, and vital infrastructure were destroyed in seconds, leaving survivors desperate for water, food, and medical aid. The official death toll exceeded 200,000, with over 1 million people displaced and tens of thousands injured. Amid the devastation, stories of human courage and tragedy unfolded. Families pulled loved ones from the rubble, while aid workers faced unimaginable challenges. The earthquake exposed not only nature's raw power, but also the vulnerability of societies ill-prepared for disaster, leaving Haiti to rebuild amidst overwhelming loss and chaos.
Between 1959 and 1961, China endured one of the deadliest famines in human history, a catastrophe that claimed tens of millions of lives. Triggered by a combination of extreme weather, misguided government policies, and the failed Great Leap Forward, crops failed on an unprecedented scale. Fields lay barren, granaries emptied, and entire villages faced starvation. Families were forced to make unimaginable choices, surviving on tree bark, wild plants, and whatever meager scraps they could find. Cannibalism and mass suffering became grim realities in some regions. This famine not only devastated a population, but reshaped Chinese society, leaving scars that would influence generations. The Great Chinese Famine stands as a haunting reminder of how political decisions, combined with nature's unpredictability, can create a human disaster of epic proportions.
In September 1666, a small spark in a London bakery ignited a disaster that would engulf the city in flames. For 3 terrifying days, towering wooden buildings, narrow streets, and iconic landmarks burned relentlessly, fueled by strong winds and tightly packed neighborhoods. The fire destroyed over 13,000 homes, countless shops, and even St. Paul's Cathedral, leaving tens of thousands homeless. Citizens fled in panic, carrying what little they could salvage, while firefighters of the era, armed with buckets and primitive equipment, struggled against a blaze that seemed unstoppable. Miraculously, the death toll was relatively low, but the city's landscape, economy, and psyche were forever scarred. The Great Fire became a story of both devastation and rebirth, as London rose from the ashes with wider streets, brick buildings, and new safety measures that shaped modern urban planning.
On the night of April 14, 1912, the RMS Titanic, heralded as unsinkable, struck an iceberg in the icy waters of the North Atlantic. The collision tore a deadly gash in her hull, and within hours, the grandest ship in the world began to sink into the frigid depths. Panic erupted as passengers scrambled for lifeboats, too few for all aboard. The ship's opulent interiors, filled with chandeliers, grand staircases, and luxury cabins, were swallowed by icy waters, taking the dreams and lives of more than 1,500 people. The tragedy exposed the hubris of human engineering and the harsh, unforgiving power of nature. Titanic became a symbol of both human ambition and vulnerability, a haunting story that continues to capture the imagination of the world over a century later.
On May 6, 1937, the majestic German airship Hindenburg glided toward its landing in Lakehurst, New Jersey, carrying passengers across the Atlantic in luxury and elegance. But in a terrifying instant, disaster struck. The airship erupted into flames, engulfing its massive frame in a towering inferno within seconds. Eyewitnesses watched in horror as hydrogen-fueled flames consumed the ship, while passengers and crew fought to escape the blazing disaster. Of the 97 people on board, 36 perished, and countless others were injured, marking the abrupt end of the airship era. The Hindenburg Explosion became an unforgettable image of human ambition meeting catastrophic failure, a fiery tragedy that burned itself into the world's memory.
On March 11, 2011, a massive 9.0 magnitude earthquake struck off the coast of Japan, triggering a towering tsunami that slammed into the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant. Waves overwhelmed protective barriers, flooding reactors and causing 3 nuclear meltdowns, the worst nuclear disaster since Chernobyl. Radiation leaked into the air, soil, and ocean, forcing over 150,000 people to evacuate their homes. The world watched in horror as firefighters, engineers, and workers risked everything to stabilize the reactors, often at the edge of human endurance. Fukushima revealed the terrifying power of nature colliding with human technology, and the long-lasting impact of radiation continues to shape lives, ecosystems, and energy policies decades later.
In the autumn of 1871, Chicago, a booming city of wooden buildings and bustling streets, was engulfed by one of America's most devastating urban fires. The blaze, which began on October 8th, spread with terrifying speed, fanned by strong winds and dry conditions. For 2 days, flames consumed homes, businesses, and landmarks, leaving over 100,000 people homeless and destroying roughly 17,000 structures. Smoke blotted out the sky, embers rained down like fiery hail, and citizens fled in panic, carrying what little they could save. Miraculously, thousands survived, and the city rebuilt stronger and smarter, rising from the ashes with stone and brick buildings and a renewed urban vision. The Great Chicago Fire became both a cautionary tale and a testament to human resilience in the face of disaster.
In the summer of 1931, China faced a catastrophe of unimaginable scale. Devastating floods along the Yangtze, Huai, and Yellow rivers inundated millions of square kilometers, destroying villages, farmland, and cities. Torrential rains combined with overflowing rivers turned the landscape into a watery grave. It's estimated that up to 4 million people lost their lives, making this the deadliest flood in recorded history. Survivors faced famine, disease, and displacement, while homes, crops, and livestock vanished beneath the relentless waters. Entire communities were wiped out, and the flood reshaped China's geography and society for decades. The 1931 floods remain a haunting reminder of nature's overwhelming power and humanity's vulnerability when rivers turn against the land that sustains it.
In the summer of 2003, Europe was engulfed by a scorching heat wave that shattered temperature records across the continent.
For weeks, relentless heat baked cities and countryside alike, with thermometers climbing above 40 degrees Celsius in places unaccustomed to such extremes. Water shortages, wildfires, and failing infrastructure compounded the crisis, while hospitals overflowed with patients suffering from heat stroke and dehydration. France, Italy, Spain, and other nations were hardest hit, and over 70,000 people lost their lives, many of them elderly and vulnerable. The heat wave exposed the deadly consequences of climate extremes and human unpreparedness, leaving a continent shaken and a stark warning for the growing dangers of global warming.
On September 26, 1983, the world came closer to nuclear annihilation than most could imagine. A false alarm at a Soviet early warning system indicated that U.S. missiles were incoming, potentially triggering a retaliatory strike. Stanislav Petrov, a lieutenant colonel at the command center, faced a split-second decision. Against protocol and pressure, he refused to report the alert as real, suspecting a technical glitch. His intuition proved correct. Satellite errors had triggered the false alarm. Petrov's calm judgment prevented what could have been a nuclear holocaust, saving millions of lives and preserving global civilization. The incident became a chilling reminder of how fragile peace can be and how a single human decision can change the course of history.
On March 24, 1989, the oil tanker Exxon Valdez struck a reef off the coast of Prince William Sound, Alaska, spilling over 11 million gallons of crude oil into the pristine ocean. The environmental disaster spread rapidly, coating miles of shoreline, devastating marine life, and destroying the habitats of thousands of seabirds, fish, and mammals. Fishermen lost their livelihoods, and local communities faced long-lasting economic and ecological consequences. Cleanup crews battled the oil for months under harsh conditions, but the damage lingered for decades, becoming a stark symbol of human negligence and the fragile balance of nature. The Exxon Valdez spill remains a cautionary tale about corporate responsibility, environmental stewardship, and the catastrophic impact one accident can have on the planet.
On April 20th, 2010, the Deepwater Horizon oil rig in the Gulf of Mexico suffered a catastrophic blowout, igniting a massive fire and causing an explosion that killed 11 workers and injured many more. For 87 days, crude oil gushed uncontrollably into the Gulf, releasing nearly 5 million barrels of oil and creating one of the worst environmental disasters in history. Coastlines were coated in black sludge, marine life suffocated, and fishing and tourism industries collapsed. The spill exposed the dangers of deep water drilling, corporate negligence, and the devastating long-term consequences of human mistakes. The Deepwater Horizon disaster remains a stark warning of how fragile ecosystems are and how quickly technology can spiral into catastrophe when safety is ignored.
On the morning of May 18, 1980, Mount St. Helens in Washington state erupted in a catastrophic explosion that reshaped the landscape forever. A massive north flank collapse triggered a powerful lateral blast, sending hot gas, ash, and debris racing at hundreds of miles per hour. Forests were flattened over 230 square miles, rivers choked with volcanic debris, and a deadly cloud of ash spread across the United States. 57 lives were lost, and thousands of animals and homes were destroyed. The eruption was a dramatic display of nature's raw, unstoppable power, teaching scientists and the world about volcanic hazards, early warning systems, and the enduring resilience of ecosystems in the face of cataclysm. In August 1883, the volcanic island of Krakatoa in Indonesia unleashed one of the most violent eruptions in recorded history. The explosion was so massive that it was heard 3,000 miles away, sending shock waves around the globe and causing atmospheric disturbances that led to vivid sunsets and climate anomalies worldwide. The eruption generated tsunamis over 120 feet high, obliterating coastal villages and killing more than 36,000 people in a matter of hours. Ash rained from the sky, covering islands, destroying crops, and darkening skies for years. Krakatoa's cataclysm reshaped the surrounding islands and forever changed the way humans understood the terrifying power of volcanoes, serving as a haunting reminder that nature can strike with unimaginable fury.
In December 1952, London was enveloped by a dense, deadly smog that turned day into night and paralyzed the city. For 5 days, a thick blanket of smoke, soot, and sulfurous fog choked the streets, seeping into homes and workplaces. Visibility dropped to mere meters, trams stalled, and daily life ground to a halt. The smog was not just an inconvenience, it was lethal. Thousands of residents, especially the elderly and sick, succumbed to respiratory failure, with death toll estimates reaching 12,000. The Great Smog revealed the horrifying consequences of industrial pollution, prompting sweeping reforms in air quality and public health. London's skies eventually cleared, but the event became an unforgettable symbol of the deadly intersection between human industry and the environment.
On the night of December 2, 1984, a catastrophic chemical leak at the Union Carbide pesticide plant in Bhopal, India, released over 40 tons of toxic gas into the surrounding city. The poisonous cloud drifted silently through neighborhoods, seeping into homes, streets, and markets. Thousands of people woke coughing, blinded, and struggling to breathe as the gas claimed immediate and devastating lives, with estimates of 15,000 to 20,000 deaths over time. Survivors faced chronic illnesses, birth defects, and a poisoned environment that persists decades later. The Bhopal disaster remains one of the world's worst industrial accidents, a stark reminder of corporate negligence, the fragility of human life, and the long shadow of chemical catastrophe on entire communities.
Between the 8th and 9th centuries, the Great Maya civilization, once a thriving network of cities filled with towering pyramids, advanced astronomy, and complex societies, experienced a mysterious and dramatic decline. Cities like Tikal, Copan, and Palenque were abandoned, their streets silent, temples crumbling, and monumental inscriptions left unfinished. Scholars believe a combination of prolonged drought, overpopulation, warfare, and resource depletion drove this collapse. Crops failed, rivers dried, and social order broke down, leaving once mighty kings and priests powerless. The Maya vanished from their cities, leaving forests to reclaim stone and stucco. Their collapse stands as a haunting reminder that even the most advanced civilizations are vulnerable to environmental shifts, human conflict, and the delicate balance that sustains societies.
By the 5th century AD, the mighty Roman Empire, which had ruled vast territories across Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East for centuries, was crumbling. A perfect storm of political corruption, economic instability, overexpansion, and relentless barbarian invasions brought Rome to its knees. Cities that once pulsed with life, temples, forums, and arenas fell into ruin. Armies splintered, trade networks collapsed, and the once feared legions could no longer defend the empire's vast borders. In 476 AD, the last Roman emperor, Romulus Augustulus, was deposed, marking the symbolic end of ancient Rome. The fall of the Roman Empire reshaped Europe, ushering in the Dark Ages, and became a timeless warning of how even the most powerful civilizations can succumb to internal decay and external pressures.
Between 1845 and 1852, Ireland was devastated by a famine that would leave an indelible mark on history. A potato blight destroyed the staple crop that millions depended on, triggering mass starvation, disease, and suffering. Entire communities were forced to watch helplessly as their neighbors, friends, and family members perished. Over 1 million people died, and another 1 million were forced to emigrate, fleeing to the United States, Canada, and beyond. Villages emptied, traditions were lost, and the Irish landscape was scarred by hunger and despair. The Great Irish Famine was more than a natural disaster. It was a human tragedy compounded by political neglect, poverty, and social injustice, leaving a haunting legacy of resilience and sorrow.
In the mid-6th century, the Byzantine Empire was struck by a devastating pandemic that would haunt history for centuries. The Plague of Justinian, caused by the bacterium Yersinia pestis, swept through Constantinople and beyond, killing an estimated 25 to 50 million people, nearly half of Europe's population at the time. Entire streets were left empty, markets abandoned, and churches overflowing with the sick and dying. The plague disrupted trade, weakened armies, and threatened the very survival of the empire. Emperor Justinian himself was stricken, and the social and economic repercussions echoed for generations. The Plague of Justinian was one of the earliest recorded pandemics in human history, a chilling reminder of how quickly disease can destabilize empires and alter the course of civilization.
In late August 2005, Hurricane Katrina, one of the most powerful storms in U.S. history, barreled toward the Gulf Coast. When it struck New Orleans, levees failed and water surged through the streets, submerging entire neighborhoods. Homes, schools, and hospitals were destroyed, leaving hundreds of thousands stranded and forcing a mass evacuation. The storm claimed over 1,800 lives and caused more than $125 billion in damage, making it one of the costliest natural disasters ever. Amid the flooding and chaos, stories of survival, courage, and desperation unfolded as first responders and residents battled rising waters, looting, and a broken infrastructure. Hurricane Katrina exposed the deadly combination of natural fury and human vulnerability, leaving an unforgettable mark on the city, the nation, and the way the world perceives disaster preparedness.
On March 18, 1925, a storm of unparalleled destruction tore across the American Midwest. The tri-state tornado, traveling through Missouri, Illinois, and Indiana, carved a path of devastation over 200 miles long, leaving almost nothing in its wake. Winds exceeding 300 miles per hour obliterated homes, schools, and farms, throwing debris like deadly projectiles. Over 700 people were killed, making it the deadliest tornado in U.S. history, and thousands more were injured or left homeless. Eyewitnesses described a wall of wind and darkness that consumed everything in its path, a nightmare of raw natural power. The tri-state tornado became a chilling reminder of nature's fury, the fragility of human settlements, and the importance of early warning systems in saving lives. In the early morning hours of April 18, 1906, the ground beneath San Francisco began to tremble, unleashing a devastating magnitude 7.9 earthquake. Buildings cracked and toppled, streets split open, and terrified citizens fled into the chaos. But the destruction didn't end there. Fires ignited across the city, fed by broken gas lines, and raged for days, consuming over 500 city blocks. More than 3,000 lives were lost, and half of the city's population was left homeless. San Francisco's skyline and infrastructure were transformed overnight, leaving scars that would last generations. The earthquake was not only a natural catastrophe, but a human tragedy.
highlighting both the immense power of the Earth and the resilience of a city determined to rise from its ashes.
On January 28, 1986, the world watched in anticipation as the Space Shuttle Challenger launched from Kennedy Space Center carrying 7 astronauts, including teacher Krista McAuliffe, into space. Just 73 seconds after liftoff, disaster struck. A faulty O-ring in the booster rocket caused a catastrophic explosion. The shuttle broke apart in a fiery cloud of smoke and debris, shocking millions of viewers who had been watching live on television. All 7 crew members perished instantly. The Challenger disaster sent ripples of grief, fear, and reflection through the United States and the world, exposing the risks of space exploration and the consequences of overlooked safety concerns. It became a stark reminder of both humanity's ambition to reach the stars and the fragile boundary between triumph and tragedy.
On February 1, 2003, the Space Shuttle Columbia disintegrated during re-entry into Earth's atmosphere just 16 minutes before landing, ending the lives of all 7 astronauts on board. A piece of foam from the shuttle's external tank had struck the left wing during launch, creating a catastrophic breach. As Columbia streaked across the sky, heat penetrated the wing, causing the spacecraft to break apart in a fiery explosion visible from the ground. The nation watched in horror, mourning the loss of pioneering astronauts while confronting the harsh realities of space travel. The Columbia disaster underscored the extreme dangers of exploration beyond Earth and became a somber testament to human ambition, courage, and the ever-present risks of reaching for the stars.
On the night of July 6, 2013, a runaway train carrying 72 tank cars of crude oil rolled into the small town of Lac-Mégantic, Quebec. The train derailed in the town center, and the resulting explosions ignited a firestorm that obliterated much of downtown, reducing buildings to rubble and engulfing streets in flames. The blast and fire killed 47 people, destroyed homes and businesses, and left the town in stunned shock. Eyewitnesses described a night of roaring fireballs, walls of smoke, and the eerie glow of a town swallowed by disaster. The Lac-Mégantic tragedy exposed the dangers of transporting hazardous materials and became a chilling example of how a single mechanical failure could devastate an entire community.
On April 24, 2013, the Rama Plaza building in Dhaka, Bangladesh, a commercial complex housing several garment factories, collapsed suddenly, trapping thousands of workers beneath concrete and twisted metal. The disaster killed over 1,100 people and injured more than 2,500, making it one of the deadliest industrial accidents in modern history. Many workers had raised concerns about cracks in the building the day before, but were forced to continue working. The collapse exposed the dark underbelly of global fast fashion, unsafe working conditions, and corporate negligence. Rescue teams and volunteers raced against time to pull survivors from the rubble, while the world watched in horror. The Rana Plaza tragedy became a haunting symbol of human cost, negligence, and the urgent need for workplace safety reforms worldwide.
On May 22, 2011, Joplin, Missouri faced one of the deadliest tornadoes in U.S. history. A massive EF5 tornado with winds exceeding 200 miles per hour sliced through the city, flattening neighborhoods, schools, and businesses in seconds. The destruction was total. Vehicles thrown like toys, trees uprooted, and homes swept off foundations. 158 lives were lost, hundreds more were injured, and thousands were left homeless as emergency crews and citizens scrambled to rescue survivors from the rubble.
The Joplin Tornado showcased nature's raw, unstoppable fury and tested human resilience to its limits, leaving a community shattered but determined to rebuild from the devastation.
Beneath the serene landscapes of Yellowstone National Park lies a sleeping giant, a supervolcano capable of eruptions far beyond anything witnessed in human history. Scientists warn that if it were to erupt, the explosion could eject thousands of cubic kilometers of magma, blanket continents in ash, and trigger global climate disruption lasting years. While the volcano has remained dormant for tens of thousands of years, its caldera and frequent geothermal activity serve as constant reminders of nature's hidden power. The Yellowstone supervolcano is not just a geological marvel, it is a potential global catastrophe, a stark testament to the fragile balance of life on Earth in the face of forces beyond human control.
On December 13, 1941, a massive natural disaster struck Juarez, Peru, when a glacier lake in the surrounding Andes Mountains catastrophically burst through its natural dam. Millions of tons of water, ice, and debris thundered down the valleys, obliterating villages, roads, and farmland in its path. The flood claimed an estimated 5,000 to 7,000 lives, leaving survivors traumatized and entire communities erased from the map. The roaring torrents swept away everything in its path, demonstrating the terrifying power of glacial outburst floods and the fragile line between nature's calm and its devastating fury. The Juarez disaster remains a haunting example of how mountains, ice, and water can combine to unleash sudden and deadly destruction. On April 25, 2015, Nepal was struck by a magnitude 7.8 earthquake that shook the nation to its core. Buildings crumbled in Kathmandu, historic temples and UNESCO World Heritage Sites collapsed, and entire villages were reduced to rubble. The earthquake killed nearly 9,000 people and injured over 21,000, leaving hundreds of thousands homeless. Landslides buried roads and isolated communities in the rugged Himalayas, making rescue efforts incredibly difficult. Amid the devastation, stories of survival and heroism emerged as locals and volunteers worked tirelessly to save lives. The 2015 Nepal earthquake highlighted the vulnerability of mountainous regions to seismic activity and reminded the world of the immense power of nature and humanity's courage in the face of overwhelming disaster.
In September 1859, Earth was struck by the most powerful solar storm ever recorded. Known as the Carrington event, this geomagnetic tempest caused telegraph systems across the globe to fail, sparks to fly from equipment, and night skies to blaze with auroras visible as far south as the Caribbean. While humanity was largely reliant on rudimentary technology, the event demonstrated the staggering power of the sun. A storm of this magnitude today could cripple satellites, electrical grids, and communications worldwide. Eyewitnesses described eerie skies glowing in red, green, and violet, a celestial spectacle hiding the latent destructive force of the sun. The Carrington event remains a haunting reminder that even distant cosmic forces can reach down and disrupt life on Earth in extraordinary ways.
On November 13, 1970, the Bola cyclone struck the low-lying coast of East Pakistan, now Bangladesh, with winds exceeding 115 miles per hour and a storm surge of up to 20 feet. Entire villages were swept away, crops destroyed, and thousands of lives lost in a matter of hours. Estimates suggest that between 300,000 and 500,000 people perished, making it the deadliest tropical cyclone in recorded history. The disaster left survivors homeless, hungry,
and struggling to recover amidst the flooded plains. The bolus cyclone not only exposed the vulnerability of human settlements to nature's fury, but also triggered political upheaval that eventually contributed to the independence of Bangladesh. It remains one of the most devastating reminders of the power of storms and the fragility of human life in their path.
On the night of August 21, 1986, a silent killer rose from the depths of Lake Nyos in Cameroon. Without warning, the lake released a massive cloud of carbon dioxide, a colorless, odorless gas that swept down surrounding valleys. In minutes, the gas suffocated over 1,700 people and thousands of livestock, leaving villages eerily deserted. Survivors described waking to find neighbors and family members lifeless, unable to escape the invisible flood. Lake Nyos revealed a rare and deadly natural hazard, limnic eruptions, where the accumulation of gases in deep volcanic lakes can suddenly erupt with catastrophic consequences. The disaster remains a chilling testament to nature's unseen dangers and humanity's vulnerability to them.
On January 15, 1919, Boston, Massachusetts experienced a disaster unlike any other. A massive tank holding over 2 million gallons of molasses suddenly burst, unleashing a 25-foot-high wave of sticky syrup that swept through the streets at 35 miles per hour. Buildings were crushed, horses and people were trapped, and the air was filled with the suffocating sweet scent of disaster. 21 people lost their lives, and scores more were injured as rescuers struggled to save victims from the viscous chaos. The Great Molasses Flood may seem bizarre, but it was a deadly reminder of the dangers of industrial negligence and the unexpected ways that human error can collide with physics to produce catastrophic consequences.
On July 9, 1958, a massive 7.8 magnitude earthquake struck near Lituya Bay, Alaska, triggering a colossal landslide of rock and ice into the narrow inlet. The impact unleashed a mega-tsunami, with waves reaching an astounding 1,720 feet, 524 meters high, the tallest ever recorded in history. Trees were stripped from mountainsides, and boats anchored in the bay were hurled hundreds of meters inland. Miraculously, a few survived, witnessing the terrifying raw power of nature firsthand. The Lituya Bay disaster revealed the extreme potential of local geological events to create tsunamis far beyond normal expectations, a dramatic reminder that even remote regions can experience catastrophic forces with mind-boggling intensity. In the summer of 1588, the mighty Spanish Armada, a fleet of over 130 ships, sailed to invade England and assert Spain's dominance over Europe. But nature and strategy conspired against them. Fierce storms battered the fleet in the English Channel, scattering ships and sending sailors into the icy waters. English naval forces used clever tactics, including fire ships, to sow chaos, and the combination of battle and brutal weather decimated the Armada. Thousands of sailors perished, and many ships were wrecked along the coasts of Scotland and Ireland. The Spanish Armada's defeat marked a turning point in history, signaling the rise of England as a global naval power and demonstrating that even the most formidable forces can be undone by a mix of human error and nature's fury.